Welcome back, guys, to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I am thankful to have Sean Perry. Sean is the co-founder of We R H.O.P.E, a nonprofit organization that brings anxiety education to individuals and schools struggling to find affordable support options. Sean, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning. Talk to us about where you grew up, the time period you were growing up in, maybe some things about your family, and yeah, go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of start from the beginning, I guess. Um, my dad was a man that looked at the world in a different way, um, and my mother was white, my father's black, and he could really care less about what the world had to say, if that makes
Oh,
sense.
yeah.
I call him the gangster. You know, he didn't care what anybody had to say. He knew what his heart said. He knew what he felt, and he knew that that couldn't be wrong. And so, I was born in 1977. The world was much different than it is now.
Yeah.
If you know, 1968, interracial marriage actually just finally came into was passed law. So only a few years later, my parents were, married and having me, and consciously made that decision to do that. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, Wallingford, and it was predominantly white. I think there was our family at that time in the early 80s. My grandparents actually had neighbors that were black, and there might have been one other family. So in that town itself had a historic, and still does, a historic level of racism. They just, it's just who they are, and it's the North. I remember growing up and seeing the Klan kind of march through town when I was at high school, or when I was in high school. I remember coming out with some buddies. The high school was near a housing project, community housing project. And it was interesting because, when you hear the projects, you think, well, all black people live there. Well, this is an all white community of projects, low income. I didn't live there. I lived down the road on a private road in a decent house. My father provided well for all of us. But a lot of my friends lived there, and we walked out one day, and there were, oh gosh, probably about 10 skinheads out there passing flyers around the cars and really recruiting. And so I grew up in this environment. I grew up with people not really understanding, I was called, the N word on a regular basis, growing up, really struggled with my identity. And when I mean my identity, not that I didn't know that I was black and should I pretend to be white and pass to be white or anything like that, but I didn't know where I belonged, right? Because you would have people that would, you'd be hanging out with your buddy, and the N word would come out, and it'd look over you like, Sean, it's not about you, right? You're like, don't worry about it. Like that's not meant for you. That's meant for the other guy over there,
Oh,
right? And so you're dealing with this constantly, but these are the people that you and you hang out with every day, and that they like you, but their mind, keeping in mind you're still a child, so you're trying to process all of this, right? I didn't go home and tell my dad every time somebody said that to me. My dad probably would have been at the school every day, right? I mean, it was ridiculous. I did actually get into a lot of fights in elementary school,
yeah,
and was labeled as the bad kid.
yeah,
But and I was forced to see a school psychologist because of my behavior, not realizing that my behavior was caused by how I was being treated,
yeah.
right? And so I struggled with that for a really long time. And in some cases today, I kind of struggle with allowing myself to go through that, right? So I had to do some self-forgiveness.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I guess, um, how aware were you of the biracial nature of your family at a young age?
Um, I remember early on going into public with my mother um, and realizing that people would look at her differently.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um, and people would say they would make these comments that they didn't realize were racist, but they so were. You know, to be like, Patty, your children are wow, they're strangely beautiful, right? Or you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and say things like that. It's
Yeah.
like, how else are we supposed to look, right? Like, you know, like, oh, this one, you know, look at her hair's like, it would just, you know, be these little things, and a lot of it I chalk up to just not knowing and just being ignorant, right? And not trying to be blatantly racist, but if you don't know something, you don't know, so we have to be honest with that, right?
Yeah.
If I went to another country, even if I went to, you know, the continent of Africa, I may say something accidentally without realizing, because I may not understand the culture or understand what certain things mean. I mean, that's, if you don't know, you don't know, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I was very, very much aware that there was a difference.
Yeah.
Very much aware.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that was. I knew I was black early on.
Yeah. Yeah.
My father made sure that I knew, but he also made sure that I knew how to protect myself and knew um, what to say, what to do, and how to respond.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about being called the N word. I mean, that's you know, that's a lot as a young kid. You know, and especially back then, you know, that'd be a lot even, you know, today with all the awareness that's going on. But back then, you know,
Well,
without.
for some people today, it's a lot. For me, it's not.
Okay.
Um, so back in the day, it was, you even made your lips form like you were going to say it. You might lose some teeth, right? That's I was a very angry kid because of that. I it was called it often, rather frequently, and so I would fight quick.
Yeah.
Um, as I got older, however, I started thinking to myself, wow, all these years, and that's the best they can do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we're talking, you know, the African American, you know, come over. It's been well over 400 years. It's been in this country. It's been the same word, the same derogatory name. Like, you can't think of anything else. You can't come up with anything new. There's tons of innovation in this country all the time, and the best you can do is continue to regurgitate the same negative word. Man, I kind of feel sorry for you.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, you know, that's really the way that I look at it. It's
Yeah.
like, if that's the best you can do, man, I've heard that before. Like, you
Yeah.
got to come with something harder if you want to get under my skin at this point.
Wow. That's a crazy perspective because.
I had a young man. I'll tell you a quick story. I had a young man. I was in one of the residential settings that I worked at, was for young boys with significant trauma. They had some of the worst cases of trauma in both Vermont and New Hampshire, and they would be sent to this home.
Yeah.
And we would have to do physical managements, which I wasn't very keen on, but there were some instances that we needed to. And so I had reduced the amount of managements that were happening in the home because I didn't believe in them. But sometimes kids are unsafe, right? And you have to do what you have to do in that environment. And I would have this one kid, and he would just be on the ground, and we'd be in a management, and he would N-word me up and down and this. And I looked at him one day because my staff was saying, Sean, how are you dealing with this? Like, I don't even know how you're sitting there, because I wouldn't say anything.
Yeah.
And so one day, finally, I looked at him. Now I'm over him like this, and we've got him in a three-man hold. So two people, one person on each arm and one person around the hips, just kind of making sure he's safe and not kicking anybody. And because these young men would hurt you.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking down at him, and I'm going, listen, man, like, I'm here, and he's, F you end this and then this and this and this and this. And I said, man, is that all you got? Like, if you want to hurt my feelings, you got to have to do something better. Come on, give me your best shot. Like, what else could you do? Well, you're stupid. I was like, okay, you're getting better, you know? And so I started to look at this in a way of people regurgitate things that they were taught without really ever understanding what it means. They just know that it's supposed to hurt somebody's feelings. But when it doesn't hurt somebody's feelings, what else can they say?
Yeah.
Right. And so I was trying to get this young man to think about that.
Yeah.
Long story short, later on, when I did finally leave that facility, that young man came and gave me a hug, made sure to come run downstairs and give me a hug. We were rather close, but you know, it's all about trying to change somebody's heart.
Yeah. Why do you think in those youth days, those kids were trying to use that? Was that an ego thing? Was that a power thing?
It's what they knew. It's what they knew. It's completely what they knew. I had met their parents, you know, and as we got older, right, I learned, you know, that's just the way their parents thought. That's what they grew up with. If you know, if you grew up thinking an apple was an orange your entire life, you would call it an orange.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, you know, when you grow up in hate, you don't realize that it's hate as a child. You just realize that when you see a person of color that's different from you, that those are the words your parents use to describe them. So you're going to use those words to describe them as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you're growing up in Connecticut. Talk to me what type of kid you are. What are your interests? What are you passionate about? Things of that nature.
Yeah. So growing up in Connecticut, believe it or not, my mother was a dancer. And so for a very long time, I was passionate about tap dance. I don't tell many people that, so now the world knows, right?
Yeah.
And she's got a bunch of pictures that, you know, she can hold me for ransom for. And, you know, she'd hold me hostage, I guess, with those pictures if they ever got out. Yeah, so, you know, I started playing youth football at a really young age. I was really passionate about just being active and playing sports. And I loved football. That was my life. And then I found track, and track and football were my life. And I did everything I could to be as good as I could. I was an all-state long jumper, triple jumper, and high jumper, all New England triple jumper, high jumper. Football wise, I was a pretty good wide receiver. Yeah, I don't know what I'd made some kind of list as a wide receiver at one point, and then fell off it. But you know, that's sports. Yeah, my passions were really, you know, just playing sports, getting out with my friends, riding BMX bikes, and, you know, you name it, like that kind of, like, as extreme sports came out, you know, I skateboarded, I rollerbladed, I rode BMX. I would do anything and everything to stay active. I was really fast. I loved to run. I mean, not distance though. I can't stand long distance running. Yeah, it's boring. But yeah, I mean, that was really what. And I was also in the all male choir in high school. My father was a musician as well as my father's done so many things, but my father's like one of those guys that can pick up an instrument and just play it. Wow. And so we had a little mini recording studio in our living room. He had his keyboard section, and we'd all get together as a family. It was like the Jackson 5, for God's sakes. And we'd all like sing when my dad would come off the road. We'd sit there on a Sunday and we would just we'd have like a jam session. It wasn't always fun because sometimes we didn't want to sing, and he kind of made us sing because he had the song in his head that he needed to get out. But yeah, so I grew up, you know, helping my father compose music at times and write songs and poems for those songs. And just, you know, we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun.
With the hindsight of knowing what you're doing now, do you look back and see, you know, points in your childhood where, you know, you were anxious, or you were dealing with some mental health issues related to anxiety, and you maybe didn't have any, you know, outlets or ability to solve the issue, or you were dealing with stuff on your own?
Yeah, every day, quite frankly. So I grew up as a really anxious kid, but people wouldn't, probably to this day, if they were to look back, would have no idea that I was anxious. Again, like I said earlier on, I struggled really to identify where I fit in. Yeah. You know, I constantly, like, who are my real friends, right? But I need friendship and I need companionship. but they say these things, but then they say they don't say them about me. So, okay, because I need somebody to talk to, right? I need friends. And then, I get on the football field and take it out there. Or I get it on, get in track and I just run as hard as I could, or, am I jumping and take all that frustration and anger out there. But I was so anxious all the time. I mean, I remember at times my freshman year, actually, I remember walking into school and just putting this persona on my face of like, no one is allowed near me. And I knew that if I looked mean enough because I was Black, that people would leave me alone.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah.
And I knew they would be naturally scared of me because that's how society is with Black men. Yeah. A lot of times, right? Not all the time, but a lot of times. And so in that era, if I put this persona on because I was feeling very, very anxious about not knowing where I belonged, I could get people to stay away and I could go about my business through the day and not have to worry about having a conversation with someone that might get uncomfortable because they might say the wrong thing.
What's the hardest part about not feeling like you belong anywhere? What is that, does it create trust issues, or what's one of the like hard parts of dealing with that?
For me, I believe that it created a lot of trust issues. I didn't trust anybody. I had one friend, actually I had two friends growing up that I'd known, almost since birth, but we're both still friends today, or we're all still friends today, differently. I had one friend that was I trusted him with anything. I know for a fact he didn't see my color. He was never raised to see color. And I know that that's a not a good statement now, but you know what? It was the 80s and 90s, and some people were raised not to see color. That's just a reality. We can't deny the fact that that's how people were raised. We have to kind of get away from that nonsense. But he didn't know. Like, I mean, he knew I was Black, but it didn't mean anything to him. I was just another kid, and so we were just friends. And so that was kind of a safe haven for me, hanging out with him. I couldn't hang out with him all the time. He was busy, his mom and him, had their own life and everything else. But that was really my safe haven. And I had another buddy, his parents were racist, but he knew that it was wrong.
Yeah.
And so him and I were close. And I think I felt safe with him. But for me, the problem of not feeling that I could trust anybody was I was constantly trying to gain acceptance in a world that I wasn't going to be accepted. And I think that became my biggest issue.
Yeah.
Right. Trying to gain acceptance from people that I knew deep down would never accept me. And they proved that later on by some things. And so, early on, I started smoking cigarettes at the age of 12, I think. I was also a kid, kids do stupid stuff all the time. Yeah. And then I think I had my first drink 13, 14.
Yeah.
And that made me feel like I belonged a little bit more.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That made me feel like, well, we're hanging out together. We're doing this thing that we're not supposed to be doing together. So we must be cool. Right. We must be connected, and we never were, Yeah. And so I had a false sense of reality, really.
Yeah. Talk to us about, especially for those of us that have grown up in the 2000s, about, did you even have any resources like mental health counselors in the 80s and 90s? I mean, like, was that even the
No. No. There was, there was a school psychologist, like I said early on, I'll never forget him. His name is, I'll call him out. He's probably since passed. He was very, very old then. His name was Mr. Bosniak. He had a pipe. He was super cool. I loved talking with him. You know what I mean? And the pipe smelled really cool. He'd walk around the school with smoking a pipe, a really nice guy. But other than that, I mean, it didn't do anything.
Yeah.
It didn't do anything. I never felt connected to a 65-year-old white man. You know what I mean? Like, how the heck could I be connected to that? Like, there was just no way to connect. But he was cool to go chill with for a little bit.
Yeah.
But there were, to my recollection, there were no mental health supports whatsoever. If you struggled, it always showed up as behavior, right? I mean, that's how kids struggle. Even today, kids are struggling in class and schools all over this country, and it shows up as behavior. And so what we as adults do is we say, wait a second, that behavior makes me feel uncomfortable, so you need to leave my class. You can't be around me. You need to go to the principal's office. Well, what does the principal do with your behavior, or the assistant principal do with your behavior typically? Well, that behavior doesn't meet our school policy, so now you're suspended, right? Whatever the case is, right? So it's constant. I think then it was constant. It was constantly focusing on behavior, and that's one of the things that I really love about what my business partner and I came up with, or not came up with, but created in the school, is we have to stop looking at behavior and start looking at what's behind behavior. And that's why we focus on anxiety.
Yeah. Because the inside is going to reflect your outside.
Absolutely.
Actions.
Absolutely. Right. So imagine, if you will, a young person whose brain has not completely fully developed, but has these thoughts that they have no value, no worth, right? At some point, those thoughts show up in behavior in some capacity, right? Whether it's self-destructive behavior, whether it's being destructive to other people behavior, whether it's suicidal ideation, self-harm, you name it, right? If a young person is dealing with something and their brain is completely not developed yet, they don't have the complete capacity to understand how to manage and work through it, especially if there are no supports readily available, right? And so our goal as an organization, and I know I'm getting a little bit ahead here, is to make sure that we help the schools identify students that are struggling, right? And then, and the way that we do that is by looking at behaviors. And so if we can notice that behavior is language, and we know that behavior is language, then what is that behavior actually telling us, right? It's saying that something within that child's environment or thinking patterns is wrong or off. And we need to get them into a space where they can learn about why they're thinking this way, why they're doing this thing, from a perspective that is not this, well, what happened to you when you were 3 perspective. Kids don't want to talk about that nonsense at the moment, right? That what they want to do is say, today, right now, this moment sucks in my life. How can I get through this day? And that's where we come in.
Yeah. For someone that's maybe a little bit skeptical of all this, maybe, they may be older, grew up in a different time, or they might even have grown up in this time, but, doubts or doesn't see the value in what you're doing and what school psychologists are doing and what therapists are doing. What would you say to them? How can we help them understand the value and the impact of what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, it's important to understand that mental illness, right, mental health affect every person on this planet in some capacity.
Yep.
So that's the first argument, right? Now, they may then still say they don't believe it. What I would then say is, all you have to do is look on what's going on in the United States right now, right? This isn't what we're seeing now is behavior, right? Which is language, which is years and years of trauma to a race of people, right? Yeah. We're seeing all these things that we see that are happening in the world, whether it's school shootings, whether it's suicide rates spiking, whether It is rioting, right? These behaviors are language to unmet needs, right? To unmet mental health concerns, right? Mental health concerns does not mean that you need to be in a psychiatric hospital, right? And I think that's the issue when we're talking about people that might be in an older generation on how they actually are viewing what mental health and mental illness mean.
Yeah.
And so it's really about breaking it down and dumbing it down for them. And I would be more than happy at any time with anyone who doesn't fully understand it to really break it down for them and let them know that I can show them in their own life where they're struggling with mental health issues, not mental illness issues, mental health issues,
Yeah.
and break it down to that simplicity because we all struggle with it.
Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah. And if I could add, I think that, we're all individuals in a society, but, all of us as individuals make up the society. And if we can help, individuals struggling with certain things and make them better, at an early age, intervene and help them with their issues, they're going to be a lot more productive members of society, and that's going to help the collective, all of us.
Right. Did you read a page from We R H.O.P.E's book? Because that's that's exactly our philosophy, right? So look, when we started this organization, we were going to go only into high schools. That was kind of our plan.
Yeah.
And within 3 months of launching, we started getting our, do you work with 11-year-olds? Do you work with 10-year-olds? Do you work with 13-year-olds? And so we quickly changed our philosophy in the way in which we were viewing our work. And we said, if we can start younger and we can change how these kids are viewing what they're going through now and give them the education now, we can literally change society, right? This platform that we have, this model that we have is planting seeds for tomorrow. Our tagline here, preparing the people of today for the anxieties of tomorrow, right? Imagine, right? So as a person who drank early on in his life and understood that it helped to reduce my anxieties, there's a lot of young people out there that are smoking weed for the same reasons, that are trying other drugs for the same reasons, to numb that pain, so forth and so on. But if you could teach them how to work through that pain in a way that they didn't ever feel like they were working through it, but learning some skills to get through it, you could naturally reduce the rate of substance misuse. Yeah. Because substance misuse is always combined with some level of mental health issues or instability.
Yeah.
Right. People don't typically, right? Youth don't go get high because they feel amazing already. They feel hot. They go get high because they feel like crap and they want to feel better. They want to numb the pain.
Yeah.
So if you could teach them how to numb the pain themselves, they wouldn't need to go get high. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's kind of the way that the way that we look at it.
So now you're in high school, and talk to us what you're thinking about in terms of what you end up doing post-grad after graduating.
Yeah, so I went to, I joined this program called the Vocational Agriculture Program my freshman year, and was going to go to school to be a veterinarian.
Okay, cool.
That was what I wanted to do. I was like, oh, this is really cool. But then I got into the program, and the way they run the program, one day I was out riding a tractor. The next day I was like, this is not, like, how am I ever going to be a veterinarian riding a tractor? I don't want to ride a tractor. I don't want to be a farmer. But it was part of the curriculum, but I didn't understand it as a kid. I was like, well, this is just dumb. And so I stopped that altogether. But then I did have this sense of really wanting to be a psychologist.
Yeah.
And wanting to help people. and that was what I wanted to do. And as far as, academically, I was a great student in the fall and a great student in the spring, football season and track season. the rest of the time, I was like, I want to just hang out with my friends and not really care, Um, and then my parents got divorced.
Okay.
My junior year, separated. Separated once before. I can't remember if it was like 8th grade year, 9th grade year. They had separated for a little while, got back together, and then they separated for good, and we're gonna get divorced. It was like my junior summer, I believe.
Yeah.
Get ready to go into my senior year. And so I moved with my dad about 20 minutes away from where we were living before. And it was just me and my father living at my grandparents' house, sharing a bed, but my dad was never home. He was a truck driver, so he was gone. When I would be sleeping, he would be working. So he worked third shift. So I said we shared a bed, but we didn't. Right. Yeah. And we did sometimes, right, depending on a day if he was home. And it's my dad. It's how we grew up. It was like, whatever, and then I went to another school. I felt now that school was completely different. So that district was much more diverse. There's a higher number of Black and brown children in that school and less number of white and or Caucasian children in that school. And when I got there, I faced kind of the Willie Lynch mindset of, oh, here's this light-skinned dude. He must think he's better than us. So now I'm dealing with this, and I'm like, I can't win. You know what I mean? Where do I fit in, right? I went in with my nice button-up shirt, my nice corduroys at the time. Not the thin corduroys, but like the big corduroys from the 90s. They were in style. With some nice shoes, and they were like, "Oh, this guy, this pretty," and he thinks he's this. And I was like, "I don't think I'm anything. I'm just coming to school." You know what I mean? So I dealt with that kind of nonsense right off the bat until I decided to run track, and then they were like, "Oh," I ran track for them, and my first jump of the year, I made all New Englands, and I didn't have to jump for the rest of the year. And they were like, "Oh, he's actually," I was just a normal guy, But it took a while, and it's not racism. It's I call it shadeism, right? My shade was different, and so I dealt with that for a while, and then I had met my high school girlfriend, and that just became, that consumed me. And when I got out of high school, and I think they consumed me a lot because of just what I was going through personally. I had someone to talk to all the time, and I had someone who it felt like they loved me at the time, and I felt as though I needed that, and I think in a lot of capacity I did. And then after I graduated high school, I was going to take a year off and just work, because I was working a full-time job in a restaurant, going to school full-time and still running track. So I was just busy. And when I say full-time, I was working like from Thursday to Sunday. I would work anywhere from 40 to 50 hours. I would just work. And I loved working. I always have. I mean, my first job was a paper route at 12 years old. And I had I got taste of money, and I ended up, getting 3 more paper routes and just trying to make as much money as I could. And then I found out she was pregnant. And I was 19 going on 20. Yeah. And I said, well, there goes college. Yeah. There goes college. Yeah. But I can say, I mean, I was scared. But in the same time, I was happy. I mean, I knew my father had raised me in a way to always know how to be responsible to some capacity, right? To take care of my responsibilities in life, and to I guess to use the term kind of man up. And so for me, I knew that, I needed to become a dad. I didn't argue with it. I didn't lose sleep over it. I didn't, there was nothing like that. Quite frankly, I was kind of happy. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be a dad now. I came to terms with it, and that was that. And I started doing everything I could in that time to work towards just being a dad, try to find a way to survive and get an apartment and all those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was, you know, I had some aspirations, and you know, life did what it did for a reason,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and then after that, we had another child after our first child was born. Um, yeah, and then we split up. I mean, it was hard. I mean, we were young, completely immature, thought we knew what it meant to be parents and what it meant to be significant others at that time.
Yeah.
You know, that young mind tells you that it's supposed to play out this way, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is it's never supposed to play out any way other than the way that you two make it play out.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, that comes down to core beliefs, right? We have these core beliefs based on what we think relationships are supposed to be, how we're supposed to communicate. But the reality is when you're in a relationship, you have to throw all that stuff out the window and figure out together how you want to treat each other.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know, right? Obviously, at a young age.
Yeah.
And then after that, my son was about 6 months old, and I had met my wife. My ex and I had split up, and then I met my wife, and we've been together for 21 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you, so said a lot there. So let me go back to, you know, let's go back to the divorce first off. I mean, you talk about 8th grade, 9th grade, then finally junior year of your high school. Talk to us about what effect that has on you as a kid, and things of that nature, especially for the people out there that have been fortunate not to have had parents that split up. I mean, how do they maybe relate to a friend whose parents have?
So first, for me, it was not a pretty divorce, right? It was a very hard, painful, emotionally painful one for me. However, you wouldn't have been able to tell, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It was my responsibility as the oldest brother to take care of my 3 younger siblings and make sure that they were okay.
Yeah.
And so I kind of took on a role as like a parent.
Yeah.
And that was my lane. But it was a burden, quite frankly, that I didn't want. And because of having that placed on me, that caused me some pain later on in life. Because when you have to be responsible for young children at a young age, and you don't get to live your teenage years because you're doing that, then that nonsense comes out later on in life. So I start doing all the stuff in my early 20s already as a dad that I should have done when I was a teenager, but I couldn't do it. So it was like a flip-flop, and it kind of messed it. I wouldn't say it messed me up, but it caused me some pain. But what I would say to people is that first and foremost, we want to validate another human being's experience and understand that even if I've been divorced or gone through a divorce with my parents, and maybe you have gone through a divorce with your parents, they're still not going to be the same thing. Sure. Because how I deal with my trauma and how it's impacted me is always going to be different. And I think most importantly, the thing for everybody to realize is that by statistical standards, divorce is trauma, right? And so when you're dealing with someone who is a young kiddo that's going through divorce, no matter how good they say they are dealing with a trauma, right? And so we don't want to patronize them and be like, well, I know you're saying you're good, but that's really got to suck. And we don't want to do that. We just want to be there and be present for them and let them know that they have someone that can support them whenever they feel ready. Because at some point they will feel ready, but we all process trauma and loss differently. Because look, a divorce is loss, it's grief, it's trauma. There's a lot of things that are going on in a child's life. And we're seeing that today in classroom after classroom throughout this country, you know, divorces, I don't even understand why people get married half the time. If you're just going to divorce in 2 years or 3 years or 6 years, you're going to have kids just to get divorced, right? If you're not willing to do the work, you know, at this point, we need to start, taking tests, right? to decide if we need to get married or not. I mean, but what they're doing is the impact on that child and those children and those two adults, right? That's a traumatic experience for the two adults, even if they want it. It's still traumatic.
Yeah.
And so I think what we would say to anybody is be there, just be present, right? Let someone know that you're an ear to listen. Don't give advice. Don't talk. Just listen.
Yeah.
Connect with them and allow them the space to feel.
Did you lose the joy of life as you were becoming more of a parental figure, at a young age for your siblings?
I didn't lose the joy of life. I just wasn't allowed to do a lot of things.
Okay.
You know what I mean? My father was strict anyway, but this just caused another layer of like, I needed to step up to help because dad was going to be on the road working. There's 2 households, you know what I mean? So it wasn't anybody's fault. It was like, this was just the natural flow, but this was tough, right? Like I wanted to go hang out with my friends. I wanted to be doing this, but instead I gotta be home and I gotta be doing this and things I didn't want to do.
What was maybe like the worst part that nobody thinks about of it? So for example, I remember my friend several years ago told me going to 2 houses on Thanksgiving for him is probably his, the thing that people don't think about, but is the worst thing for him because he's got to do 2 separate plans. They have to schedule, one person's going to do dinner at 4 and then the other's going to do it at 8. And so like he has to manage these, 2 things. Was there something similar to you that?
So for me, I didn't care about that stuff. We had always kind of gone to my grandparents' house anyway. We always were in 2 places for Christmas and Thanksgiving, always.
Yeah.
So that was normal for me. Like we would go to one set of grandparents' house and go to the other set of grandparents. So we were always used to that travel on the holidays.
Yeah.
The worst part for me was finding out things about my parents that I had no business ever finding out.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There were things that I just should never have known. And I wish I could take them out of my head and never know them.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they were said, and I know them. Yeah. And that, to me, was the most damaging part because it made me have a view of my parents that I shouldn't have had. I should have known that they were going through something, being supportive of it, and being there and being my role as a child. But once the veil has been lifted, almost like Eve taking the bite of the apple, right? Once it's done, it's done. You can't unknow it. You can't unlearn it. Yeah. And to me, that was the most difficult part.
Yeah.
That was a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
That was a lot of trauma.
Yeah. Next thing, I guess, talk to us about finding out, at a young age, at 19, 20, that moment that you found out, your girlfriend was pregnant. I mean, just talk through that process of, were there conversations about not going through with it? Were there, conversations about, of how you were going to handle the relationship now and stuff? I mean, how has your world changed in that moment?
So I will say that when I found out, it was interesting. She said that we had to talk. And as soon as she said we had to talk, there was something about the tone that I knew. I was like, she's pregnant.
Yeah.
Crap. Here we go. Yeah. My biggest fear was telling my dad.
Yeah.
I think her biggest fear was telling her parents.
Yeah.
I knew my mom's pretty chill. I know she wasn't happy about it, but I can't remember a time where my mother yelled and screamed at me ever. You know what I mean? Like she's a pretty relaxed, laid back woman. Yeah. But I did fear telling my dad, and not for like anything he would do, but other than just to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Disappointment. As far for me, I grew up in a home that just didn't believe in abortion.
Yeah.
You know, and she grew up in a home the same way. So it just wasn't even a question of, like,
Yeah.
I don't even think we had a conversation about it. If I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
it was, okay, what do we do next?
Yeah.
Right. And so I was like, all right, so this is what I need to do. And I believe we had a conversation about what I needed to do. And for as far as a job, looking for a better job at the time, and where we were going to live, and, you know, all these things. And her family had some personal things going on themselves at that time, and we're trying to figure out their living situation. So there were a couple things up in the air.
Yeah.
So that was really the kind of the focus. But yeah, it was, I mean, the conversation itself was, quite frankly, was actually pretty easy.
Yeah.
Gotta be honest with you. It was a pretty easy conversation.
Good. What was the, I guess, leading up to having your first child? Like, what were some of the hard parts? What were some of the good parts? And, you know, how did becoming a dad change you?
Well, I think the hard part was, for me, was making sure that I was going to be able to provide, right? Like, how can I be that quote unquote man that I need to be, and I'm supposed to be, right? Like, and I took it. What's that?
Financially, or
Yeah, financially.
Yeah.
As far as being yeah, that was my biggest piece, right? Like, I need to be able to provide financially. The issue is at that time, is, if I actually, you know, thinking back at it now, is I had no idea what that even meant, right? Like, what is the amount of money that I actually need?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
You know, I just knew that I needed money, and I
Yeah.
needed an apartment. And if the apartment cost this much, I needed to make this much. Like, I knew that. But like, as far as being a dad, that would, to me, in all honesty, that was kind of like a walk in the park for me. I'd grown up in a very large family. There were always, you know, I had younger siblings, but I had tons of cousins and all that. And there was always little kids around. My cousin actually had just had his son, and he was finishing college. And so his son was actually at my grandparents' house where I was living at the time.
Yeah.
And so I ended up taking care of him when I would get home from work to kind of practice, you know, like change the diaper, and, you know, I'd hang out with him all the time, and I let him sleep on my chest. I feed him his bottle, and I was like, yeah, I got this, you know? So for me, it was pretty easy. The hard part was, that part was easy, but I had a mindset of, I still need to go out and do all these things. I need to go out and party and hang out with my friends and this and that. And that was the part that I couldn't let go.
Yeah. For, you know, any person or couple that, you know, is a little bit younger than usual, that might be, you know, going through, having a baby. What's one piece of advice that you learned from your experience that they could use?
Yeah. Well, I would say the one of the bigger pieces of advice is spend some time figuring out what you want together. Really, just really sit down, have a conversation of what you want, and see if you can do it together. And not based on what you feel in the moment, right? Emotions, they make us feel things that are there, but logic comes out of the window sometimes.
Yep.
Sit down and have a legitimate conversation, right? Create a space for you two to sit down and talk about, can we do this together, or do we need to do it apart? Because years of arguing and yelling and this and that, and because you're not prepared, is going to impact your child.
Yeah.
So create a plan together, is if this is this or is this not what's actually right for you?
Yeah.
You've already done it, right? You already got the child, you're going to have it. But is this right for you? Have a real conversation. And if you don't feel as though you can have a real conversation around it, go to a professional and seek out a space where you can have that conversation in real time.
Yeah.
That would be what I would say.
Yeah. So, from what I gather, the two of you ended up splitting up.
Correct.
Okay. Talk about that process and maybe some lessons from there, uh, things of that nature.
Yeah,
What?
let's. I want to keep that one short, if that's okay.
That's fun.
Yeah, that process was not an easy one.
Yeah.
It was not easy. I think, I'm still feeling the effects of it to this day, 23 years later. There's a lot that has transpired, that still kind of impacts some things to this day, with my two older kids. I would say that it it just was not healthy.
Yep.
And I'm sorry that it wasn't healthy, and for whatever role I played in it. But there is it can have everlasting effects on your life.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't know, and people forget that men have feelings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So how did you open yourself up for love again, and finding your wife?
Well, I met her. I met my wife at a restaurant I was working at. I'd been in a car accident, and I needed to go back to work. I'd been out of work, and so I got a job just washing dishes, just to like get back to work. I had to do something, so I took the first thing that I could find, and my wife was there. Another waitress told me that my wife thought I was cute, and she was walking down the stairs one day. I think it was like the next day or something, and I grabbed some courage and said, "Hey, I heard you think I'm cute. Let's grab a glass of wine sometime," or something like that. And for some reason, I said wine because I thought it sounded more mature. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, all right, let's grab some wine.
Yeah.
And we've been together ever since. Would
Yeah.
be the easiest way to explain it.
Yeah. How did you manage, you've gone through your own parents' divorce, you've just split up, but like how did you manage being open? How did you manage
I didn't.
trusting?
I didn't. I didn't manage it.
Yeah.
It was more of an action, to be quite honest with you. I didn't manage it. I never. I didn't address any of those things that happened. There was no space in my life at that time. I think the way that I managed it then was to be out at the bar and hanging out with my friends and going to the clubs, and that's how I managed it. Right, by not addressing it or not facing it.
Yeah.
That's how I managed it.
Would you do anything differently if you had a chance to?
Yeah, I probably would have been in therapy, actually trying to really manage it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Life
Yeah, there would have been somebody, I think I would have found someone there I could have really talked to. And I think even to this day, there's some aspects of it where, I'm in a much better space, but there's some aspects where I still haven't really addressed some of it, in all fairness. I mean, I think I use the excuse now, I'm 43 years old. So what's the point? But I am addressing it in my own way at times by creating specific changes in my life and things that I do and the way that I do them. But so for me, forgiveness for myself and for my parents was really kind of the biggest piece, though.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit more now. So you're throughout your 20s, you're in the restaurant industry.
Yeah. So I started in the restaurant industry at 16, and worked through all the way through high school, and then I was in my 20s working in restaurants down in Connecticut, and then eventually when my wife and I decided to get married, I moved up to Vermont with her, and continued to work in restaurants up here. So I'd worked in a restaurant industry for about 20 years. And I had been everything from a dishwasher to a restaurant manager. I mean, you name it, I had done it, and executive chef, sous chef. I've done all that kind of stuff and just worked my way. Always like grinding to work my way up to be what I wanted to be. And I just I knew that I loved the industry and the work, but in order to be successful in that industry, you have to really have a significant piece of something. And as I was getting older, I realized that I wasn't going to get there by the time I wanted to get there.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't want to be on my feet at, 45 years old on a line working 70 hours a week. I just didn't want to do that. I'd done that for years. It's terrible. At that time I'd coached youth basketball, youth football, and just continued. I'd been working with kids for years. And I was running a football camp, a summer in my 30s. And I came home from that camp, and I said, I was working at a restaurant then as a sous chef. And I come home and I said to my wife, I'm going to quit my job. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm going to quit. She's like, well, why are you going to quit? And I was like, because all I want to do is work with kids. I was like, I've done this camp. I was like, I've had so much fun. This is the work that I want to do, changing lives. This is how we change, and I just, and so I started looking for a place where I could do that. And I was lucky and found a residential facility that took me in as a residential counselor. Now, the thing with that is what most people don't realize is that residential counselors make about $11 an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, at that time, I had 5 children. I have a total of 5 children, and a wife and myself. So that's 7 people in the house, a rent, vehicles, and I was making about at that time, I think I was making about 55 grand, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And I had gotten offered to stay for a little bit more money. And I still turned it down because I knew if I didn't turn it down, I would remain in the restaurant industry for even longer.
Yeah.
Because I'd always been chasing the dollar, right? And that, for me, that was the piece. Chasing the money so that I could be financially stable, but never doing something that I really, truly, and honestly loved.
Yeah.
Right. And, I prayed on it, to be quite honest, and asked God to show me if this was the way that I needed to go and if this is where I should be. And, well, here I am. Still working with kids. I went to the residential center and I started out as a residential counselor. Shortly after that, I became a team coordinator there and started running the facility, and did that for about 3 years, and then left and went to another facility while I had created We R H.O.P.E. And I went to this other facility, and I stayed there for about 7-8 months. And then I just couldn't stay there anymore because I needed to get We R H.O.P.E. where it needed to be.
Yeah.
And I needed to invest all my time into our organization. And that's what we did. Yeah.
What inspired you to start We R H.O.P.E.?
What inspired me to start We R H.O.P.E. was that we were working at a residential facility that cost upwards to $90,000 for 60 to 90 days for a child to go there.
Wow. Okay.
And so, although we were doing really awesome work with those kids, and the facilities, they do great work. I will never take that away from them.
Yeah.
But that price point says that you have to be in the top 1% of society in order to get help. Explain to me why you only have to be in the top 1% of society to get help.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, this is, quite frankly, this is bullshit. I said, if we look at the data, the nationwide data today, and we see how anxiety, suicidality, and mental health is on a rise as a whole, how can we in good conscience only help the 1%? And that's how I felt, right? Like, we're just helping the 1%. What about all the other kids? What about all them? What happens to them? Oh, we know what happens to them. It's a school to prison pipeline, right? It's you name it. The negative connotations are around it. They're gonna have a less likely chance to be successful because they're not addressing these things. Where these young men and women have all this support, and they're gonna go off and be super successful. Yeah. You know what I mean? We're talking about kids that missed 1 year, 2 years of school, and they're going to go to residential for 60 to 90 days and maybe go to another facility after that. And they're going to go off and graduate from a private high school and then go off to Harvard and graduate from Harvard.
Yeah.
Right. That's the reality of it. Yeah. And no one's ever going to know, right, that these kids struggled. There's all these other kids that are going through the same exact thing in public school every single day. And you know where they're going to go? They're going to get kicked out of school. They're going to get sent to an alternative program, and they're going to end up on a street somewhere working at McDonald's.
Yeah.
So I said, we got to do something here.
Yeah.
We got to find a way to help. And so we started looking at modalities that would be able to support kids in schools that was different than anything anybody else has been doing. And one thing we know is they have school counselors, they have psychologists that kind of come in, they have student wellness programs in schools. They've got a bunch of different stuff. But no one is doing direct support every single day. And that's where we said, okay, how do we create a direct support program? So I started looking into different modalities that were feasible and that really worked. And what we came up with was I became a certified life coach. A life coach is there to support you in the moment, to create daily, weekly, monthly goals, and to get you from point A to point B based on the fact that they believe that you have the power to do it. Yep. You can empower yourself to create real everlasting change and growth within you. You just need a guide.
Yeah.
So start thinking about that. Man, wait a second. When I coach football and I coach basketball, that's exactly what we're already doing with our boys and our girls, right? I got a team that has never played together. They're not good. How do we do it? Each one of them, that lineman, that tackle, that guard, that defensive end, that free safety, strong safety, they all have a very specific goal to get through practice, to get through the game. It's the same thing to me, right? So, and the great thing about life coaching is I can see people as often as I want.
Yeah.
So there's no restriction. So if we brought in a group of therapists, well, the therapists would then see them on Monday and see that kid next Monday. Yeah. Well, that's what's already happening, and it's not working. Yeah. Right? Yeah. What we realized from residential, what was really, really working well was consistency in support. So the therapists are doing some great work with those kids, but the therapists aren't the ones doing the daily work with these kids. The residential counselors are. They're the ones on the grind, boots on the ground, making sure that everything that therapist is working through with them is being implemented in these children's lives every single day and everything that they do. All right, so how do we bring the residential counselor to a public school? We certify all of our coaches as certified life coaches, and we couple that with being cognitive behavioral coaches. So we're using CBT techniques. We're not doing cognitive behavioral therapy. We're using the techniques of cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah. So coupled with life coaching, you combine those two, you have a pretty amazing program that's allowed to support children 5 days a week for a half an hour every single day. That's awesome. In a school setting. Outside of a school setting, we support adults and children up to 7 days a week, sometimes 2 times a day, depending on the need of the student and the adult.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about, your co-founder and talk to us a little bit more about, what it takes to start, a nonprofit and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So James and I met at work. I was the residential coordinator for the front half of the week, which is Sunday through Wednesday. And he was the residential coordinator for the back half of the week, which would be Wednesday through Saturday. Yeah. And so when he took over that role, James and I connected rather quickly because there was a lack in communication from both sides of the week. So you would have one coordinator here saying, we're going to do things this way. Another coordinator over here saying, we're going to do things this way. Kids are getting a mixed message, and you can't run a business that way. You can't run anything that way.
Yeah.
So James and I started meeting on Wednesdays, but we would also talk every Saturday night before I would come in the morning on Sunday and work a 16-hour shift. he would give me a rundown for the last 3 weeks. And we started this process. And what we noticed by starting this process and working together, that we started to get a much better program at this facility on how we were all interacting and supporting the children, because it was one common goal to support children the same way.
Yeah.
And so one day we were meeting on Wednesdays to hang out and kind of just, because Wednesdays were our days where we would actually get out of work a little bit early, because we had a full team from both ends of the week that were on that day because they had to get their hours. So James and I were actually able to leave work about 6 o'clock, and he had employee housing and was down the road. So we'd go there, we'd hang out, and we would just chat about our week and, what the kids are doing and our staff, and, just kind of have a good time. And one day we had this conversation about there's got to be something more. I don't know if I think I brought it up, and then we started, he was giving me his ideas. And one day I said, "Hey, can I tell you a secret?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure. What?" And I was like, "Well, Alicia," oops, I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, I was like, my boss told me that she asked me what my 5-year plan was.
Yeah.
And I told her that, for one, I would like to take her job over. I'd like to be where she is so that she can move up and take over the position above her. And I'd like to be completely running the facility. But I'd also like to see our organization at the time that I was working for go into public schools and support. Yeah. And so he's like, "Oh my gosh." He's like, "I had a similar conversation." So that was like kind of like a spark.
Yeah.
And so I think that night we actually said, "Let's do this. Let's create a company."
Wow.
And then the next week I was there on Wednesday and we created the company. I was like, "How much money do you have on your credit card? And I'll tell you how much money I have on my credit card so we can get the LegalZoom process to like create the organization." So we spent the night creating the name of the company, so forth and so on, got all of our paperwork filed as an LLC first, just to get the name up. And we did that. And we had the idea in December of 2016 was the idea. By the time the paperwork was done and everything was filed, I believe it was June of 2017, we became a legal nonprofit after like state filing, because everything took a while. After state filings and all that, we became a legal entity in June of 2017.
Wow.
And we just we literally did it overnight.
Yeah. How hard was it? What was that moment where you were like, "Wow, I'm going to actually do this"? Like, did you talk to your wife and friends, or like, what was the, that's the step a lot of people don't take.
Yeah. And I think that was it. It was like, we need to do it right now. If we can get it on paper as an LLC, then it's on paper. We have to do it. We've already said we're a business, right? And that process itself wasn't that long. It just took long to file everything. And then you had to do it with the state and then this and that. But I mean, for us, it was like, if we keep talking about it, it's not going to get done. We're not going to talk about it anymore. Just file the paperwork, be done with it, and then figure out how you're going to do everything else.
Yeah.
Right. So I talked to my wife about it. She said it was a great idea. Nobody knew where it was going to take us. If that, we had these grandiose ideas, but we didn't know where it was going to take us. We had no schools. We had no prospects. We had nothing.
Yeah.
We just said, we have this idea. We know for a fact it's going to work, but we don't know how it's going to work.
Talk about creating the brand and what the initial reaction of schools were. What were some of and how did you innovate, or how did you pivot from the initial direction and things of that nature?
So we started out as an LLC, like I said. And so we had our company through that June of 2017, kind of when it came out. We then had to break the news to our bosses that we had a company, but that we weren't doing anything with it, and we wouldn't be taking business from them.
Yeah.
Because we had to put a Facebook page up. We had to kind of start getting people to know about it. And we knew that it would come out, but we didn't want to offend anybody. Like, their clientele was completely different from our clientele.
Yeah.
But you could sense the tension in the air. Like, they were not happy. Yeah. And I'm like, you're a multi-million-dollar company and you're mad at the little guy.
Yeah.
For trying to help the little guy.
Yeah.
You could sense it in the air. Like, people just were not happy about it. But I don't do things to make other people happy. So So I ended up leaving them. My business partner left them as well. And I took another position down the road at another facility, managing their whole facility.
Yeah.
And I then got a call from a parent of a student that was at that facility, saying that she heard that we had an organization and what we did. That family lived in Georgia. Our very first client was in Georgia.
Wow.
And we used a telecoaching platform right off the bat. So we've been doing telecoaching since its conception of this organization. That was kind of the foundation and the backbone of what we were going to do, because we could reach out across the world and support anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
And so we didn't really know how to get into schools.
Yeah.
And so I went online. I made a list of every superintendent's email address in the state of Vermont and New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And I just started reaching out.
Wow.
I mean, literally, that's what I did.
Yeah.
Just complete cold emails, and sending them. I've got superintendents who still have never responded to me, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And then I started meeting people as we started talking about the work that we're doing. And that kind of blossomed into getting a meeting with a superintendent. And then from that meeting with the superintendent, it became a principal of one of his schools. And then it was just that one school. Then it became all of the district. Then it became, then we were in another school, and I had reached out to one of their student wellness people, and I had spoke at an event. And from there, just being able to talk to people and show them who we are and what we do has kind of opened up some doors for us. So anytime I have an opportunity to really speak on the organization, I try, because we're still small. People don't know that we're here.
Yeah.
We're not a household name. And the brand is my big mouth, right?
Right? You gotta go out
I had an opportunity to speak at Dartmouth this year, which was just huge for me, right? Like, they don't just let anybody come speak at Dartmouth, you know? And so it was, those are the things that, we're trying to do, is to get there, to get in front of people. The brand is really saying that we have something that no one on this planet has and is offering. And we know that you need it. You just have to realize that you do.
Yeah. What has been the response from the school perspective, and talk about some of the partnerships you've made and how it's gone?
So we've been in one school district going on 3 years now. So that says a lot.
Yeah.
We've been in another school district going on 2 years now, or 2.5 years. This would actually be, because they got us a half year. The response has been great.
Yeah.
Every school year at the beginning, it's always rocky. There's always bumps in the road, only because we're trying to identify students. We're helping that process out with the school, and schools just often get off to a rocky start. But the overall response of our work and our ability to support children has been phenomenal, has been absolutely phenomenal. When I say we haven't had any complaints, I mean, I legitimately mean we haven't had any complaints. I mean, you get the typical kind of thing here and there, like this kid's schedule doesn't fit up with the time that you're available. And so we come in and we work some things out. But as far as what they're seeing as an end result in the process of how these students could have gone another way had they not had the We R H.O.P.E supports, it's just been tremendous. We had a student last year that we worked with, and we started working with this student at the beginning of the year. What we were told right from day one was this student had missed so many days of school the previous year that she may not be able to, she wasn't probably going to show up to school this year, but they may have to file like some kind of CHINS report on her and report to the state.
Yeah.
We started working with the student right off the bat. That student never missed a day of school that entire year.
Wow.
Like, that in itself says everything.
Yeah.
Because they had someone there, a trusted adult, that was helping them work through, because there was a lot of anxiety there, helping them work through their anxieties and discomforts at the beginning of every single school day before it even started.
Yeah.
This kiddo would come in 15 minutes early to school. Our coach would be there. And so actually James was there, our co-founder. He would be there and support this kiddo before school started, talking about what they were anxious about for the day, helping this kiddo get out of the car, because sometimes she wouldn't even get out of the vehicle, and just there for them. There's no other program doing that.
Yeah.
And what they would have now is like, you might have a teacher that might do that, but guess what? That teacher's got things to do.
Yeah.
Right? That guidance counselor may do that, but that guidance counselor has things to do. They're not going to do it every day.
Yeah.
So having a dedicated organization that is there to support, again, I mean, that's what differentiates us from anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess talk about your vision and hope, you know, for the coming years, and you know, where do you want to see We R H.O.P.E, you know, a year from now, for example?
Yeah. So, well, a year from now, it's kind of a hard one because of all that's currently going on with COVID. Who knows where anybody's going to be a year from now?
Yeah.
But I would say, you know, prior to this, you know, what we want to see is we want to see consistent growth, right? We want to see, you know, if we're in 2 school districts now and 5 schools or 10 schools or whatever it is, or however it works, we want to see that every year we're picking up at least another school or another district.
Yeah.
It looks like we're going to pick up a new district this year. We're just waiting to hear back on some things, which is really great, which has about 7 schools within that district. So that'll be a big deal for us.
Yeah.
So we're looking at that. We not only do we want to see the growth there, but we want to start talking about expansion. When we created this, one of the things that we talked about was making sure, or not making sure, but eventually making sure that We R H.O.P.E is in all 50 states. That is a really big goal for us that we also believe is a tangible goal over time.
Yeah.
We are, along with that, one of the things that we want to do is we want to open up a residential facility so that those kids that don't have the financial resources that need residential support can actually get it at an affordable cost. So we've talked about some ways to fund it. We would fund it through owning some property, in a sense, in the terms of like having We R H.O.P.E Airbnbs, nonprofit Airbnbs, that then help fund that residential facility so that kids can then go there. So for instance, let's say I owned a place on the beach and it was $500 a night. Well, every one of those nights that you stay, that's a donation to help support a child in residential.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we're looking to do that. You know, ideally, we'd like to get to a place where we have some deep coffers, right? where some people have donated some amounts to us that can really help with our mission.
Yeah.
To be able to go into schools that can't afford us, right? There's some schools that are dancing this tightrope of Medicaid funding right now. That's typically how we're paid for, that are dancing this tightrope, and Medicaid may not be giving this much this year, and you know, they'll say, well, you know, we can only do 1 hour. Well, your school is 3 hours away, and I can't hire a coach for 1 hour. Like I can't do that. So what we have to do is we have to find somebody to be in that school for at least 5 hours to make it valuable. So if we had resources in, then We R H.O.P.E could then donate those resources to pay for that coach to be in there for for that 5 hours. So, you know, the donation piece, the resources piece is just a big piece for us, of where we want to be. Right. That's where we want to be, to be able to have that financial support. And we want to continue to be innovative, right? I'm working on another project right now, to go into Black and Brown communities and educate and support generational trauma and anxieties in those communities, while bringing in financial literacy and education to help create generational wealth in those communities. Just because you started off in poverty doesn't mean you have to end up in poverty. But I can tell you that if you continue to buy $300 Jordans, you're going to continue to be in poverty. That's just a reality. So how do we learn how to manage and budget our money while working on our mental health so we can change the generations to come after us? So I'm working on a project now with that.
Yeah, there may be some, and I probably should ask this earlier. There may be, some teachers or school administrators that watch this video. Can you talk to them about, um, how your organization comes in? How do you fit in within their school system, or just talk about the implementation part for them who might not be aware of, how you're working with this school district for 3 years and
Absolutely.
yeah.
So first, we are not a fly-by-night organization. Come in, do our work for 6 hours or 7 hours, and then our coach or our therapeutic support person walks out the door. We become fully integrated, not only in the school, but within the community.
Yeah.
So what that means is, let's say, I'll kind of roll this out and not make it too long of a explanation. Let's say the contract happens, we start in the contract signed for the end of August to June would be the contract. What I would then do is myself typically comes in and meets with the admin team. Okay. Talk with the admin team about what their goals are, how they would like to, or what are some of the students that they want to support, who they are. And there's a referral process, right? Why are you sending this student to We R Hope? First, you understand what We R Hope does. This is our process. So really breaking down, our process, who we are, what we do, why we do what we do. And most importantly, remind our educators that we are not what's the word I'm looking for? That we are not the place where you send bad kids. We're not that program, right? Yeah. We're that program where you might have a child that's struggling. We're going to teach that child how to work through that struggle, but we're going to stop using the language around bad kids, right? Like we get rid of all of this stuff. And so we partner and become really tight knit. And how we implement it is, first we need an office, right? Where's a space for us to work? We then work with so up here in New Hampshire, they would have a person who's in charge of the MTSS system, the multi-tier levels of support. And so mental health supports students are tiered. So you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And so we fall in about tier 2 work, right? And so because we're a preventative organization, it's how we look at it. It's prevention. So teachers and administrators, they have an opportunity to then have, before school starts, to then have me come in and do a training around anxiety and CBT. Really give them the core foundations of, this is our philosophy. This is the lens in which we're going to be working from. And this is the lens in which you should be looking at behaviors moving forward. Yeah. And when we are all on this same page, then you're going to see change within your students and within this school as a whole. But if we continue to focus only on behavior, you're going to continue to get the same result, because you're treating the behavior and not what's behind it. So I come in with a very strong message there. We then offer emotional CPR training as well, which is then a way for them to learn how to actually communicate with another human being that's in crisis in a way that is non-threatening and that is non-judgmental and basically pushy, right? We want to learn how to be real listeners, not just an active listener, right? But a connected listener to another person that's currently struggling. So we try to bring these pieces in first to lay that foundation in August. And then in September, we then start identifying students because typically most schools know what students are struggling.
Yeah.
And so we then start identifying, they start sending referrals over. We ask why. And then we start meeting with these kids 5 days a week. James and myself, we typically interview almost every single student before they ever meet a coach. So that means we travel to every school, no matter where it is. Now, at some point, that's got to change, right? Right. Yeah. But right now, right, that's what we want. We want to know our kids personally. But what's also important to understand with our organization is a teacher cannot send a student to us, and a parent cannot send a student to us that does not want to do the work. So we turn kids away all the time.
Yeah.
So, and what I mean by that is a parent will call and say, oh, I want you to work with my son or daughter. And we'll say, okay. And I'll say, they'll say, well, when can we start? And I say, well, I need to talk with them first. They're like, what do you mean? I was like, I need to make sure they want to do it. Like, what do you mean? Like, I want you to do it. I was like, it doesn't matter if you want me to do it.
Yeah.
They need to buy into this. They need to buy into this process. So many children are being told what they need to do on a regular basis that they cannot buy in to getting support if you're forcing them to do it. And so our goal in life coaching is to empower people, right, to take control of their lives. Now, how can I empower you to take control of your life if somebody else is already controlling your life?
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
The coaching process doesn't work. So the kids have to want to be there. And quite frankly, I'm a pretty good salesman when it comes to the kiddos, right? There's nothing that kids like to hear more than I'm never going to tell them what to do and they have all the power, right? Of course I want to do that program. So that's one of the reasons that James and I, we go in and promote it that way with our kids, because look, to me, there's nothing that saddens me more when we're talking about kids getting support when their parents are forcing them to go get that support. What we should be asking those kiddos is, why do they not want to get that type of support, and what's holding them back? Yeah. Those are the questions. Instead of force, we should be asking questions so that we can gain a better understanding.
Yeah. That's awesome. Sean, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
I think that's it. I think that's about the nuts and bolts. If anybody would like to donate, they can go right onto our website and donate anytime. That'd be great.
Yeah. So, Sean, I just want to acknowledge, you and the work that you're doing. It's, absolutely terrific. And, I just, as we talked about, I have a belief that we can always make an individual better. And I have a belief that, through coaching or, through getting therapy or through help, that, people can transform. And finding out about your organization has been awesome, because to attack, the anxiety problem or the mental health problem at a young age is so powerful to creating a better tomorrow. Because if they address it, now they become better, children and better teens, but then they become better adults. Right. And so it creates a great world. So I just want to acknowledge the awesomeness of what you're doing. For anybody out there that wants to reach out, whether that's a life coach that wants to work at your organization, or a school administrator that maybe wants to learn more about a partnership, can you talk about how they can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to kind of back up just for one quick sec. And it often gets kind of not swept under the rug, but overlooked. We also support adults. Yeah. Right. So, and I think that's a really big piece, because we do a lot of work with kids, but we support adults, and we're actually talking about going into starting a senior section as well. We're going to start working with seniors as well, because they also struggle with anxiety.
Adults have mental health issues. Yeah,
exactly. So how people can get in touch is they can contact me via email at Sean, SEAN, at wearehope.org. And that's WERHOPE.org. That's my direct email. They can find us on the web at www.wearehope.org. Really simple. WERHOPE.org. We're on Facebook at We R Hope Inc., Instagram We R Hope Inc., and Twitter at We R Hope Inc. All very simple ways to find us. And they can call me directly at 802-234-3581. Again, that's 802-234-3581. 3581. I welcome all calls anytime. As you'll notice, if you go online, you'll see that if you go to the Google section, it's very rare that there's a day off. We don't ever take any days off. I'm always working. I'm always available. Even when it says we're closed, we're not closed. So we are here to support anybody, and anywhere, anytime. So. Yeah,
and in terms of donations, they can go to the website as well.
Yeah, if you go right to the website, there's a space there that says donations there, or they can go and just more than happy to mail a check to the address and our website.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here.
I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All right, you take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.